The autumn leaves danced gently outside the grand windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine sat in the morning room, her fingers wrapped around a warm cup of tea that had long since grown cold. She watched the groundskeepers tend to the gardens below, their movements methodical and peaceful, completely unaware of the storm brewing within the palace walls. The weight of the conversation she'd had with William the night before pressed heavily on her chest, making each breath feel labored. William had been called away on urgent royal duties to Commonwealth nations, a tour that would span several months. The timing couldn't have been worse. Their relationship, though strong, was still finding its footing in the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny. Every photograph, every public appearance, every shared glance was dissected by the media and the public alike. The pressure had been mounting for weeks, and now this separation would test everything they had built together. Catherine remembered the exact moment when William had received the call from his private secretary. They had been enjoying a quiet dinner at his apartment, laughing about something trivial, when the shrill ring of his phone shattered their peaceful bubble. She watched his face change as he listened to the details of the tour, saw the resignation settle in his eyes as he realized what this would mean for them. The palace corridors felt different that morning as Catherine made her way to William's private study. The usual bustle of staff seemed muted, as if everyone sensed the gravity of what was happening. She found him standing by the window, still in his formal clothes from the emergency briefing he'd attended at dawn. His shoulders were tense, and she could see the conflict playing out in his reflection in the glass. "The Commonwealth tour cannot be postponed," he said without turning around, his voice carrying the weight of duty that had been ingrained in him since childhood. "The diplomatic implications are too significant. Father has made it clear that this is not negotiable." Catherine approached slowly, her heels clicking softly against the polished wooden floor. She understood the burden he carried, the impossible balance between personal happiness and royal obligation. It was something they had discussed many times during their courtship, but the reality of it was proving more challenging than either had anticipated. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension beneath the fabric of his jacket. "I know you have no choice in this," she whispered, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "I've always known that your duty would sometimes take you away from me." William finally turned to face her, his blue eyes reflecting a pain that mirrored her own. The morning light streaming through the window highlighted the worry lines that had appeared on his face over the past few weeks. The pressure of being second in line to the throne was taking its toll, and this forced separation felt like another burden added to an already heavy load. They spent the morning going over the details of his departure. The tour would take him to Australia, New Zealand, and several Pacific islands. The itinerary was packed with state dinners, official ceremonies, and diplomatic meetings. There would be little time for personal communication, and the time difference would make even brief phone calls a challenge. Catherine listened as his private secretary outlined the schedule, each commitment feeling like another day stolen from their relationship. She maintained her composure, nodding at appropriate moments, asking practical questions about timing and logistics. Inside, however, her heart was breaking a little more with each detail. The media speculation had already begun. Royal correspondents were hinting at strain in their relationship, questioning whether Catherine was truly suited for royal life. The constant scrutiny was exhausting, and now this separation would fuel even more gossip and analysis. She could already imagine the headlines that would follow William's departure. As the afternoon wore on, they found themselves alone in the palace gardens, walking along the path they had strolled countless times before. The familiar surroundings provided some comfort, but everything felt different now, tinged with the sadness of impending separation. The gardens that had witnessed so many happy moments between them would soon be a place where only Catherine walked alone. William stopped beside the fountain where he had first told her he loved her just 6 months earlier. The memory of that perfect evening seemed like a lifetime ago now. The same bench where they had sat and planned their future together now served as a painful reminder of how uncertain that future had become. "I need you to know that this changes nothing about how I feel," he said, taking her hands in his. His fingers were cold despite the mild weather, and she could feel the slight tremor that betrayed his emotional state. "You are the most important person in my life, Catherine. This tour, this duty, it's something I have to do, but it doesn't diminish what we have." Catherine looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, but also the fear. They both knew that long-distance relationships were difficult under the best circumstances. For them, with the added pressures of royal life and constant media attention, the challenges would be even greater. The uncertainty was almost unbearable. They talked about practical matters, how they would communicate, when they might be able to speak, what the media strategy would be during his absence. These conversations felt surreal, as if they were planning for someone else's life rather than their own. The romance that had brought them together was being overshadowed by the harsh realities of royal duty. The palace staff moved around them with quiet efficiency, preparing for William's departure. Suitcases were packed, documents were prepared, and security details were finalized. The machinery of royal life continued its relentless march forward, indifferent to the personal cost being paid by those caught up in its wheels. As evening approached, they shared what would be their last dinner together for months. The dining room, usually a place of warmth and intimate conversation, felt cavernous and cold. They spoke in hushed tones about everything and nothing, both avoiding the elephant in the room while simultaneously being unable to think about anything else. Catherine watched William as he tried to eat, seeing how the stress of the situation had affected his appetite. She memorized the way he looked in the candlelight, the familiar gestures he made when he was thinking, the sound of his laugh when she tried to lighten the mood with a gentle joke. These details would have to sustain her through the long months ahead. The evening news carried the first reports of William's upcoming tour. The anchor spoke in measured tones about diplomatic initiatives and Commonwealth relations. But Catherine could read between the lines. The subtext was clear. This was a test of their relationship, and the world would be watching to see if they could survive it. Later that night, as they lay together for what would be the last time in months, neither of them slept. They talked quietly about their hopes and fears, making promises they both hoped they could keep. The darkness around them felt protective, a cocoon that held the outside world at bay for just a few more hours. William spoke about his fears of losing her, about the impossibility of asking someone to wait for a life filled with such uncertainty and sacrifice. Catherine listened to his words, feeling the weight of the choice she was being asked to make: stay and endure the separation and scrutiny, or walk away from the love of her life to protect herself from the pain that royal life would inevitably bring. The decision, she realized, had already been made long ago. From the moment she had fallen in love with William, she had accepted that their path would never be simple or easy. The challenges they were facing now were just the first of many they would encounter together. Her love for him was strong enough to weather this storm, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead was almost overwhelming. As dawn approached, bringing with it the reality of their separation, Catherine made a quiet vow to herself. She would prove that their love was strong enough to survive whatever challenges the royal life would throw at them. This farewell would not be the end of their story, but rather a test that would ultimately make them stronger. The morning light crept slowly across the bedroom floor, marking the beginning of what would be one of the most difficult days of both their lives. In just a few hours, William would leave for the airport, beginning a journey that would take him thousands of miles away from her. The thought was almost unbearable, but Catherine steeled herself for what lay ahead. Their love story was about to face its greatest challenge yet. The morning of William's departure arrived with unseasonable gray clouds hanging low over London, as if the weather itself was reflecting the somber mood within Kensington Palace. Catherine had barely slept, spending most of the night watching William as he dozed fitfully beside her, wanting to memorize every detail of his face before he left. The dark circles under his eyes told her that his sleep had been just as restless as her own wakefulness. They moved through their morning routine in a careful dance of normalcy, both trying to pretend that this was just another ordinary day. William shaved while Catherine showered. They shared breakfast while reading the morning papers, and they discussed the weather as if it mattered. But underneath these mundane activities, the tension was palpable. Every gesture, every glance carried extra weight because they both knew it would have to last for months. Catherine had chosen her outfit carefully the night before. She wore a simple navy dress that William had once said was his favorite, paired with the pearl earrings he had given her for her birthday. She wanted him to remember her looking beautiful, but she also wanted to feel strong and composed for the cameras that would undoubtedly capture their goodbye. The last thing either of them needed was for their private pain to become tabloid fodder. The palace staff moved with quiet efficiency around them, loading suitcases into cars and making final preparations for the departure. Catherine noticed how they avoided making eye contact with either her or William, sensing the emotional undercurrent of the morning. Even the usually cheerful housekeeper spoke in hushed tones, as if afraid that normal conversation might shatter the fragile composure everyone was trying to maintain. William's private secretary appeared in the doorway of the breakfast room, his expression carefully neutral, but his presence unmistakably signaling that it was time to leave. Catherine felt her stomach drop as reality crashed over her once again. Despite all their preparations, despite knowing this moment was coming, she wasn't ready. She didn't think she would ever be ready to watch the man she loved disappear for months. They walked together through the palace corridors one last time, their footsteps echoing in the vast spaces that had become so familiar to Catherine over the past year. She tried to memorize the way William's hand felt in hers, the sound of his breathing, the subtle cologne he wore. These sensory memories would have to sustain her through the lonely weeks ahead. The royal car waited in the courtyard, its engine running quietly, ready to take William to the airport. Several security officers stood at a respectful distance, their presence a stark reminder of the public nature of William's life and the impossibility of a truly private goodbye. Catherine had known this moment would be observed and analyzed, but the reality of it felt more invasive than she had anticipated. They stood together beside the car for a moment, both struggling to find the right words. What could they possibly say that would capture everything they were feeling? How could they express the depth of their love and the pain of separation in a few brief sentences? The inadequacy of language had never felt more apparent than it did in that moment. William reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package, pressing it into Catherine's hands. "Don't open it now," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Wait until tonight, when you're alone. It will help you remember that even though I'm far away, my heart remains here with you." Catherine clutched the package tightly, feeling the weight of whatever was inside. The gesture was so thoughtful, so perfectly William, that she had to blink back tears. She had prepared something for him too, a letter that she had written and rewritten a dozen times, trying to capture her feelings perfectly. She slipped it into his coat pocket, their fingers brushing as she did so. "Promise me, you'll read it on the plane," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "When you're feeling lonely or uncertain, remember that I'm here, waiting for you, believing in us." The time for delay was over. William's security team was making subtle gestures indicating that they needed to leave soon to stay on schedule. The royal tour operated on a precise timeline, with dozens of officials and dignitaries expecting his arrival. Personal feelings, no matter how deep, could not be allowed to interfere with duty. William cupped Catherine's face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears she hadn't realized were falling. She looked into his blue eyes one last time, seeing her own pain reflected there. He leaned down and kissed her, a soft, lingering kiss that held all the love and longing they couldn't express in words. When they finally broke apart, both were fighting to maintain their composure. "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying more weight than any elaborate declaration could have. "That will never change, no matter how far apart we are or how long this tour lasts." "I love you too," Catherine replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Come back to me, William. Come back soon." He climbed into the car with visible reluctance, each movement deliberate and slow, as if he could postpone the inevitable by simply taking his time. Catherine stepped back but kept her eyes fixed on the car window, wanting to see him until the very last second. Through the tinted glass, she could see his silhouette, and she knew he was watching her too. The car began to move slowly across the courtyard, its wheels crunching softly on the gravel. Catherine remained motionless, her hands clasped tightly together, watching as the most important person in her life was driven away from her. The distance between them grew with each passing second, but she didn't move until the car had disappeared completely from view. Only when she was completely alone did Catherine allow herself to break down. The tears she had been holding back finally came, and she sank onto a nearby bench, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. The palace felt impossibly empty without William's presence, and the months ahead stretched out before her like an endless desert. The media reaction was swift and predictable. By evening, the newspapers were already speculating about what William's departure meant for their relationship. Some headlines were sympathetic, focusing on the challenges of royal duty and long-distance love. Others were more cynical, questioning whether Catherine would wait or whether this separation might be the beginning of the end for their romance. Catherine avoided reading the coverage, but she couldn't escape it entirely. Well-meaning friends called to check on her. Each conversation a reminder of what she was going through. The sympathy was appreciated, but it also made the absence feel more real, more permanent. She found herself longing for the normalcy of a relationship that didn't play out in the public eye. That evening, alone in her apartment, Catherine finally opened William's gift. Inside the small box was a delicate gold locket, and when she opened it, she found a tiny photograph of the two of them from their recent holiday in Scotland. They looked so happy and carefree in the picture, completely absorbed in each other and unaware of the challenges that lay ahead. On the back of the locket was an engraving. "Distance means nothing when someone means everything." The inscription was perfect, capturing exactly what she needed to hear. She fastened the locket around her neck immediately, feeling its weight against her skin like a physical reminder of William's love. Meanwhile, somewhere over the Atlantic, William was reading Catherine's letter for the third time. Her words were a lifeline in the sterile environment of the royal aircraft, a connection to the life and love he had left behind. She wrote about her confidence in their future together, about the strength she found in their love, and about her determination to weather whatever challenges lay ahead. The months that followed were a test of endurance for both of them. Phone calls were rare, and often interrupted by poor connections or time zone complications. When they did manage to speak, their conversations felt rushed and unsatisfying, always ending too soon with promises to try again soon. The spontaneous intimacy of their relationship was replaced by scheduled calls and carefully planned conversations. Catherine threw herself into her work and charitable activities, trying to fill the void left by William's absence. She attended events and functions, always maintaining the graceful public persona that had made her such a beloved figure. But those closest to her could see the strain she was under, the way she checked her phone constantly for messages that rarely came. William's tour was a diplomatic success, but personally, it felt like torture. He fulfilled every obligation with the professionalism expected of him, but his heart remained thousands of miles away. Late at night in various hotels across the Commonwealth, he would hold Catherine's letter and stare at the locket he carried with a photo of her inside, counting the days until he could return to her. The distance between them felt like more than just physical miles. The different time zones meant they were living completely opposite schedules. And when one was starting their day, the other was ending theirs. The lack of shared experiences began to create a gap that no amount of love could easily bridge. They were both changing and growing during their time apart, but without each other to witness and share in those changes. The media scrutiny intensified as the weeks passed. Every public appearance Catherine made was analyzed for signs of distress or loneliness. Every smile was interpreted as either genuine happiness or brave facade. The pressure of maintaining appearances while dealing with private heartbreak was exhausting, and there were times when Catherine wondered if she was strong enough to continue. As William's tour entered its final month, both of them were counting down the days until his return. But the approaching reunion also brought new anxieties. Would they still feel the same connection after months apart? Had too much time passed for them to simply pick up where they left off? The questions haunted both of them as the date of his return grew closer. Their love story was about to enter a new chapter, one that would determine whether they could overcome the challenges of royal life or whether the forces pulling them apart would prove too strong to resist. The morning of William's return dawned crisp and clear, with the first hints of spring visible in the London parks. Catherine had barely slept the night before, alternating between excitement and nervousness about seeing him again. 4 months and 12 days had passed since their tearful goodbye, and during that time, both of their lives had changed in ways they were only beginning to understand. The woman who would greet William at the airport was not quite the same person who had watched him leave. Catherine stood before her bedroom mirror, applying lipstick with hands that trembled slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. She had chosen a red coat that William had always loved, hoping to recreate some of the magic of their early relationship. But as she looked at her reflection, she could see the subtle changes that the months of separation had wrought. There was a new maturity in her eyes, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. The separation had not been kind to either of them, but it had taught Catherine valuable lessons about herself and about the nature of royal life. She had learned to navigate the constant media attention with greater skill, had developed deeper friendships within royal circles, and had discovered reserves of inner strength she never knew she possessed. But more importantly, she had learned that her love for William was not diminished by distance or time. The drive to the airport felt both endless and too short. Catherine found herself caught between wanting to rush toward their reunion and wanting to delay it. Afraid of what she might discover when she saw William again. Would the easy intimacy they had shared still be there? Or would they feel like strangers who had to learn each other all over again? The uncertainty was almost unbearable. The Royal Terminal at Heathrow was a world unto itself, shielded from public view but buzzing with the quiet efficiency of royal protocol. Catherine waited in a private lounge, her hands folded in her lap, trying to project calm while her heart raced with anticipation. She wore the locket William had given her, its familiar weight against her skin, a reminder of the bond that had sustained them through their time apart. When word came that William's plane was approaching, Catherine felt her breath catch in her throat. Soon, very soon, she would see his face again, hear his voice without the distortion of a poor phone connection, feel his arms around her. The thought was almost overwhelming in its intensity. 4 months of longing and uncertainty were about to come to an end. The plane touched down with a barely perceptible bump, and Catherine watched through the window as it taxied toward the terminal. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. She smoothed her coat one final time and checked her appearance in a small mirror, wanting to look perfect for this moment they had both been dreaming about for months. When William appeared in the doorway of the aircraft, Catherine felt time stand still. He looked older somehow, more serious, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of the weight of responsibility he had carried during his tour. But when he saw her waiting for him, his face broke into the familiar smile that had captured her heart years ago. And she knew that despite everything that had happened, despite all the time and distance that had separated them, the essential William was unchanged. The few steps between the plane and where Catherine stood felt like an eternity. But finally, he was there, reaching for her with the same urgency she felt. When their arms closed around each other, Catherine felt as though she could breathe properly for the first time in months. He was solid and real and warm, and the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something indefinably him made her feel as though she was truly home. They held each other for long minutes, neither wanting to be the first to break the embrace. Around them, the airport staff and security personnel maintained a respectful distance, understanding the significance of this moment. When they finally did pull apart, both had tears in their eyes, but they were tears of joy and relief rather than the sorrow that had marked their goodbye. "You're here," Catherine whispered, reaching up to touch his face as if to convince herself he was really real. "You're actually here." "I'm here," William confirmed, catching her hand and pressing it against his cheek. "And I'm not leaving you again, Catherine. Never again like that." The drive back to the palace was filled with the comfortable silence of two people who no longer needed words to communicate their feelings. William held Catherine's hand throughout the journey, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on her skin, as if reacquainting himself with her touch. They looked out at the familiar London streets, both thinking how strange it was that the city looked exactly the same when so much had changed for them. Back at Kensington Palace, they found themselves oddly shy with each other, like teenagers on a first date, rather than a couple who had been separated by circumstance. The intensity of their reunion at the airport had given way to a more tentative exploration of how they fit together after so much time apart. They sat together on the sofa in William's apartment, close enough to touch, but maintaining a small space between them as they began the delicate process of reconnecting. William talked about his tour, describing the places he had seen and the people he had met. But Catherine could hear the underlying narrative of loneliness and longing in his stories. He spoke of lying awake in unfamiliar hotel rooms, thinking of her, of carrying her letter until it was worn soft from handling. She shared her own experiences of the past 4 months, the challenges of maintaining a public face while dealing with private heartbreak, the way she had thrown herself into charitable work to fill the void of his absence. As the afternoon wore on, they began to relax into each other's company again. The easy banter that had always characterized their relationship slowly returned, punctuated by touches that were both hesitant and hungry. They were rediscovering each other, learning how they had both changed during their separation and how their love had evolved in response to the challenges they had faced. That evening, they walked through the palace gardens, where they had said goodbye 4 months earlier. The spring flowers were just beginning to bloom, and the air was filled with the promise of renewal and new beginnings. They stopped beside the fountain where they had shared so many important moments, and William turned to face Catherine with an expression more serious than she had ever seen. "Catherine," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "these past 4 months have been the most difficult of my life. Every day away from you felt like a year, and every night I fell asleep wondering if you would still be here when I returned. I know the life I'm asking you to share with me is not easy. I know there will be more separations, more challenges, more moments when duty will pull us in different directions." Catherine listened with her heart in her throat, sensing that this moment was somehow pivotal to their entire future. The seriousness in William's voice, the careful way he was choosing his words, suggested that he had spent his time away not just missing her, but thinking deeply about their relationship and what it meant for both of their lives. "But I also know," he continued, reaching into his jacket pocket, "that I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You are not just the woman I love, Catherine. You are my partner, my strength, my future. And if you'll have me, if you're willing to take on all the challenges that come with loving someone in my position, I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you made the right choice." When he dropped to one knee beside the fountain, Catherine felt the world stop spinning. The ring he pulled from his pocket caught the last rays of the setting sun, its sapphire center surrounded by diamonds that sparkled like stars. But it wasn't just any ring. Catherine recognized it immediately as Princess Diana's engagement ring, a piece of royal history that William was now offering to her. "Will you marry me, Catherine?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly on the words. "Will you be my wife, my princess, and eventually my queen?" Through her tears, Catherine could see the vulnerability in William's eyes, the fear that, despite everything they had shared, despite the love that had sustained them through months of separation, she might say no. The thought was absurd. Of course she would say yes, had always known she would say yes. But she understood his need to hear the words. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, her voice ringing across the garden. "Yes, William, yes, of course yes." The ring slipped perfectly onto her finger, as if it had been waiting for her all along. As William stood and pulled her into his arms, Catherine felt the last piece of her heart that had been broken by their separation click back into place. The months of uncertainty and loneliness had led to this moment. This perfect, shining moment, when their future crystallized into something beautiful and real. They kissed as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed to bless their engagement. Around them, the palace gardens that had witnessed their courtship, their goodbye. And now their engagement seemed to exhale in satisfaction, as if the very stones of the palace approved of the match. The ring on Catherine's finger caught the light as they walked back toward the palace, hand in hand, ready to begin the next chapter of their love story. The separation that had tested their relationship had ultimately made them stronger, more certain of their love and their commitment to each other. They had proven that their bond could survive the challenges of royal life. And now, they were ready to face whatever the future might bring. As they reached the palace doors, Catherine looked back one more time at the gardens where so much of their relationship had unfolded, the fountain where William had first told her he loved her, the bench where they had planned their future, the path where they had walked during their painful goodbye. All of it had led to this moment of perfect happiness. The tearful farewell that had shattered their hearts had ultimately brought them to this joyous reunion. Their love story had survived its greatest test, And now they could begin to write the chapters that would follow, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The graceful, tearful moment of their separation had given way to the radiant joy of their engagement, proving that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are those that overcome the greatest obstacles. Their fairy tale was just beginning.